really the intention here. No worries. But yeah, that's really the intention here, is to have a conversation, right? So I'm not here necessarily to completely present an idea, but to more have a dialogue between all of you about what I think is a really important topic. So yeah, this is Elon Musk's 5-step process and its impact on the future of Agile. And just to kind of give you a highlight of what this picture is, this is in Hawthorne, California. This is where SpaceX is headquartered, and I'm doing a handstand in front of the Falcon 9 rocket, pretending that I can somehow lift 25,000 pounds with my muscular arms there. Didn't actually work. Let's see. Okay. So why is this topic important, right? Business leaders love to copy success, especially basic frameworks and principles. And I'm assuming everyone knows who Elon Musk is at this point. He's the richest man in the world, $297 billion net worth last year. So he's definitely someone that a lot of business leaders are looking at and trying to understand, like, what's he doing, what's going on, right? There have been not a whole lot of insights into what Elon Musk is actually doing until recently. So this was kind of an unusual format that some of these ideas came out in, but since then it's gotten a lot of popularity and started to spread. So just if you want to go into this topic a little bit more, the video that he talks about the 5-step process is actually 2.5 hours long. It was during an interview where a guy, the Everyday Astronaut, he's kind of a YouTube personality, does a walkthrough of their base in Boca Chica, Texas, where they're building the next generation Mars and moon rocket. So this was an opportunity for them to kind of show what's going on at the Starbase. But then kind of interestingly, during that conversation, Elon just kind of in his own rambling ways just starts talking about business processes and really starts digging into these core principles. So there's a lot there if you want to learn more about what's going on with building the rockets. There's that. There's also a lot of stories and anecdotes. And he does talk about some of the stories about how the 5-step process applies to things like building Tesla and SpaceX. There's 3 videos there, so I linked them here, and we can make sure that we get this presentation out to everybody afterwards. I do want to be careful about what this conversation is not. I know Elon Musk is a very controversial figure. So one, the idea here is not to talk about Elon Musk himself. Really, it's more about the process that we're discussing here. It's also not talking about the business ethics of Tesla and SpaceX. I know that that's going to be pretty controversial too. So I'd just like to try and keep the conversation more around these specific principles. And then I just had to show off my nerdy side here a little bit. It's not about the pros and cons of the Bell engine nozzle versus the aerospike. That's an aerospike on the side there. Super cool. If anyone wants to get nerdy about rockets with me, I'm happy to talk about aerospike engines with you. And just a little bit more context before we dive in as well. The 5-step process does not replace other Agile processes. I want to be careful about that. It's not an alternative to Scrum or Kanban or something like that. Tesla and SpaceX use many Agile processes internally, and they use this kind of in parallel. So think of it as more of like a parallel idea or set of principles. This process also was designed more with the idea of both hardware and software products. So thinking, cars, rockets. I think there's some element of when he worked for PayPal or created PayPal that is part of it, but it is more around some of these products that are more hardware based. And then from insiders that I've talked to at SpaceX personally, right, they kind of emphasize that when they start there, they're really focused around more of the process, the 5-step process and these principles, not so much Agile. So the teams there are actually kind of create and use Agile processes as needed. So it's a little bit more organic in the way that they bring about those processes there. So that's just a little bit of context to maybe help understand, where this 5-step process is coming from as we dive in. And then what does this look like? So I went into the video, I found some clips of Elon. So you're actually going to hear Elon talk about these things very quickly. And then we can have a conversation about what that actually means at a deeper level. And I thought it might be useful to kind of prep you with some questions to keep in mind as we're going through. So as we're going through each of these 5 steps, I want you to think about, how this applies to your current Agile experience. Is your work environment doing this today? If they are, what's working about it and what isn't working about it? And if your work environment isn't doing this today, what could be valuable about it and what concerns might you have, right? So this is kind of like looking at, hey, if this is something that's coming in the future, is that a good thing? What do we need to be watching out for? What's something that we need to be concerned about with how this may play out in the future? And then we'll have about probably 8 minutes or so to share your thoughts with the group here about anything about these questions above or any other thoughts that you have. So this is the opportunity to have that conversation together. You're also welcome to add those questions to the Jam board. And Nancy, did you put the link in the description already? All right. Doesn't sound like it. Again, I'm hoping the audio works here.
First, make your requirements less dumb. Your requirements are definitely dumb. It does not matter who gave them to you. It's particularly dangerous if a smart person gave you the requirements, because you might not question them enough.
Yeah, you might take it as like gospel. Like, yes. I have to do this thing.
Everyone's wrong, no matter who you are. Everyone's wrong some of the time. So make your requirements less dumb.
Did the audio work okay for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's the first one. Make your requirements less dumb. And I kind of captured some of those notes here. Something that was not captured in this clip that I do want to highlight is that he talks about putting a name and not a department to a requirement, so that every requirement you can have a conversation about, right? You can reach out directly to the person that made that requirement and have a conversation. And he kind of talks about some experiences where sometimes it comes from an intern that no longer works there. That's the root of some of these requirements.
Yeah, I'd love to implement that at my company. I think putting a name to a requirement is a good idea for accountability purposes, and to make sure that it's not something that some offhanded thing that ended up getting into product.
Yeah, do you see this problem show up very often?
Yeah, it seems like the bigger risk would be, well, don't ascribe it to a department, that's for sure. The bigger risk would be having whoever suggested it shoved to the side because they're not high enough on the food chain.
I guess it depends largely on the company, but in my experience, having requirements that are unaccountable, or you can't figure out where they came from, doesn't lend you to figuring out why those requirements are there, right? You have to go through this kind of tumultuous path of reverse engineering where, when, why the requirement was created, rather than being able to directly ask, or at least ascertain the information immediately.
Okay.
Also, I think part of it is if you have requirements, doesn't matter who it comes from, but it has to be prioritized as well. And that might come as part of that conversation.
So I'm curious if anyone has had the experience of, like, can you talk to me about who is able to actually speak up and say that they don't like a requirement, or is that a challenge as well? Based on position or something like that.
For my group, it's not a problem. It's more of habitual of not asking. And that's one thing I work with them on is, and it's not, I don't say everyone's wrong. It's two things: the start of a conversation and the ability to have those open, honest conversations where, both sides are open to that. I think part of it might be organizational and the organizational hierarchy, and then it's perceived as a requirement. I don't like to call them requirements because people feel like those are in stone. It's almost like being dictated. So I guess my short answer is I don't think it's a problem. It's more of letting people know what my expectations are.
Yeah, I think you said something that I really feel personally is that it's one thing to have good or bad requirements, but it's another for people to actually speak up about it and take responsibility for it, right? Like, I know in my experience, it's really hard to get someone on the development team, for example, to say, hey, that's a bad idea. I have a different idea, or why are we doing this kind of thing? And so I think there's almost like an implicit action expected here. I don't think Elon says it, but I think there's like an idea of like, it's not just a passive, make your requirements less dumb. It's like take an action to go out and check them and actually validate that they're the right kinds of requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that circles back to, you don't want to be building stuff that you don't actually need to build, right? You don't want to build stuff that isn't providing value. And if you don't question requirements, it's very easy to have a bunch of stuff that isn't actually valuable in the product.
Yeah, I definitely harp on the why, understanding the why, having a why, and there is no why. Then to your point, Danny, there may be no value.
Right. And if you don't attach a name to it, I suppose there's no way to figure out what the why is, right? What are you going to do? Like ask a department? You have to actually track down that person or the committee,
Yeah.
who put that requirement.
And I've worked on both the project management side and the Agile coach. And from the Agile side, I look at a requirement as a user story, which obviously has the format where you get the conversation because you're just giving them enough information to say, hey, you're the expertise, go figure out how, but this is what I want. So I see a requirement here as an interchangeable word for a user story in the Agile world, where you do have to have your name on it. You know who that product owner is or who to talk to because they wrote the user story usually.
Yeah, and I would say too that just even for me, I've heard requirements called different things at different organizations, and sometimes that's all it takes is just to change your mindset around, like, where I'm working now, we call them hypotheses or bets. What's our bet? Right. And that completely changes the way you think about it.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting take that it's like, I think there's kind of a pattern that if you do one thing, if you do one user story and then you follow it up with another user story, that because it's kind of like that sunk cost fallacy where you stop checking to see like, wait, was this a good direction in the first place? Do we actually test the hypothesis and find out like, was this a good requirement to begin with? And again, kind of that why too. It's like, well, it's like, okay, so we improved X by, an X percentage amount, but what did that actually do? Was that useful? Was that important? So is there anything that stands out here where someone might have a concern, right? Let's say that we jump into the future and a business leader says, hey, everyone, we're doing the 5-step process now. And part of this is making your requirements less dumb. Like, does anyone see anything where this might be a danger? And Maru or Maru, I'm not sure how you say your name. I do see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have any context at all. I do not know the 5 practices, but I can tell you one thing about requirements. People like Mary Poppendieck and Tom Poppendieck consider them just one of the main forms of waste. So proxies, just proxies to value, to be avoided. But obviously there is a lot more thinking behind this one sentence. But without context, this sentence might sound not so smart, but that's what I wanted to share about bullet point number 2. Requirements are particularly dangerous. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think I don't think I actually said that when I first showed this slide, but that was something he specifically does call out, right? It's like, if you're smart and you have a requirement, people are less likely to question you. And that's not a good thing, is what he's saying there.
I think it's interesting too, that point number one, that everyone is wrong. I think from the perspective of having, in this description, having that conversation is putting two heads together. So even if you think you know what you know, you're getting a second opinion. So it's almost like team development or those kind of things in the Agile world that are different ways of saying this. You're not deciding on your own. You're having someone else with a different perspective in that conversation to get a better answer.
Yeah, and that someone is the customer. And so since no customer knows everything that all other customers want, and even what this particular customer wants, maybe they're gonna want something else in 5 days or 5 months. The only way is to keep talking to the customers about little tiny pieces, as little and small as possible. But again, I don't want to hijack your talk, Mike. I'm sorry.
Oh no, this was the intention, right? We actually built in this space to have a conversation about each of these points. So we're going to be going through all five. This is the first one. So you're doing great. Thank you for contributing.
Yeah, I just want to add, sorry, this is Zohaib from Sydney. I just want to add on the second point. So yes, could be dangerous if it comes from someone smart, or also if it comes from someone who is up in the hierarchy and may not be knowing what's happening at the ground level.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I was actually, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, when it says from someone smart, did it really mean from someone that believes they're smarter than everyone else?
I take that to be someone that is like an expert in the area.
Okay.
And the reason is because they think they know what's best.
Yeah.
But until they have that conversation in different perspectives, it's maybe not the best way to go.
Right. That makes sense.
There's actually a lot of people who worked on this. I don't know if you know the psychologist Jordan Peterson, who wrote the 12 Rules for Life. He's a super famous guy. He's everywhere. He's on TV the whole time. I don't know if you know him. Jordan Peterson, you know him? Anyways,
I do not.
He keeps explaining those phenomena that occur when somebody is very articulate and very, very smart. And because of that, they mislead people to think other things in a very manipulative way, sometimes being conscious of that, sometimes not being conscious of that. And so it's very, very dangerous to be smart or articulate or both. Extremely dangerous, sometimes for yourself too.
Okay, so we've had a little over 9 minutes of conversation on this one. Just for the purpose of keeping time, I'd like to move on to the next one, and we can have this conversation about the next one. All right, if we're ready.
Then try very hard to delete the part or process. This is actually very important. If you're not occasionally adding things back in, you are not deleting enough. Right. The bias tends to be very strongly towards let's add this part or process step in case we need it. But you can basically make in-case arguments for so many things. So you got to delete the part or process step. Super important. And you can't like hedge your bets. Anyway, so step one, make your requirements list dumb. Step two, delete the part or process step. If you're not deleting a part or process step at least 10% of the time, basically, if you're not adding things back in 10% of the time, you're clearly not deleting enough. Right.
Okay. So yeah, I think the highlights there, right? Don't build for in-case scenarios, or try to limit that at least. And I really like that line, add processes back 10% of the time, or you're not deleting enough. Again, there was another thing that I couldn't find the clip for that was not covered in that little clip, which is he talks about how much time is spent in process testing. And he says tests are useful for diagnosing a problem. Once the underlying cause is fixed, remove the test. Otherwise, it's creating waste and drain over the long period. Again, this was designed for more of a kind of a hardware process, but it might be applicable to software as well. So let's start the timer so we can have another conversation about this one.
This one really hits me because I had a tester that would test for every scenario. And we just finally put our foot down and said, this isn't even something somebody's going to do. You need to just test what we're doing. So I agree with this huge way that sometimes when you're doing something, you're going out of the box. It's not even something you need. So review that thing and make sure that you're not keeping it because it wastes everybody's time and effort.
I'm a little fuzzy on that. Isn't regression testing part of some of the stuff that we should be doing? Or are you meaning something else entirely?
I'm talking, the person I'm referring to actually tested every scenario somebody could do with the product. It's like the customers weren't even going to try some of the things this person was doing. So I'm not talking regression testing or the regular test cases. I'm talking the tester turning the system upside down backwards in case somebody might do this.
Okay, so not like, so what I think I hear you saying is so the test went beyond even what the users were doing during testing that might have been unexpected behavior, that this person was going beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and speaking as a former QA person, that's something that good QA folks do is they call the regression test suite. You know, they review it frequently and say, you know, what do we still need and what don't we need anymore? It's a good practice.
It reminds me of a time after you said that, when I was working at a company and we did a big user acceptance testing, and we found a bug where this was for an e-commerce store, but halfway through their purchase order, they tripped over their plug and unplugged it, and it became a problem, and they actually had to go in and fix it and say like, hey, if you ever unplug your computer in the middle of trying to do a purchase order, we've got a problem, right? And I'm thinking, and what if you added that to your test suite, and every single time you added any feature, you had to unplug your computer in the middle, you know? So I did actually think this one was a really interesting one as well, because, you know, again, in software, we do talk a lot about quality and making sure that you do have pretty robust testing. So I'm kind of curious on people's thoughts on, you know, could this be an issue? Maybe you're deleting too much.
I think they're talking, seems to me, about likely versus a corner case, because you can't do everything, is what I'm hearing. But you know, if you want to go back to the space program, they actually do add in things. For example, during the first space testing, they found out that you can't use a pressurized capsule full of oxygen. You guys remember that one? So they lost lives of astronauts because they initially pressurized the space capsules with pure oxygen. And so any spark, they figured out later on, caused a death. You guys remember that now?
So it's happened with Apollo 1, right?
That's was it Apollo or was it a Mercury? Can't remember now. But they changed the whole scenario based on that. So obviously they didn't think enough about what could be, but that was like a really important thing to test, right? Or think about. So, you know, think about other things that are not as likely or impactful, I think is what I would take here, right? So don't like bulletproof everything if you don't need to, and maybe spend more of your time on things that are really important.
If I was going to chime in, Stuart, it sounds like what Elon is saying in this clip is that, okay, so you're testing each time for detonation, right, on the capsule, right? You light a spark plug, you know, you've got capsules that are detonated. So now you create a test for checking if it's going to detonate. You light the spark plug and it detonates, and then, you know, you build another prototype and it detonates again. And then you're like, oh, it's because we have pure oxygen here. And then you try it again, spark plug goes off, it doesn't detonate. Now you can remove the test, right? Because you've figured out the underlying problem. So in hardware, and I personally come from that space, every test is an additional, like essentially assembly step, right? A test isn't just some software thing that runs well, as part of your kind of build sequence. It's something that needs to usually be physically done. And so you count it more as an assembly step rather than a test step. And so every single time that you add one of those assembly steps, you're essentially increasing your bill of materials and your cycle time for iterations. So I don't know how applicable it is to software, but definitely slows down hardware processes.
One thing I want to add from my side as well is when it comes to depends on the impact that Stuart was actually pointing out that when it comes to life and death, it was going over. But from our side, working in medical company, actually, when it comes to providing our software, any products you're working on, it needs to have an FDA approval. So when it comes to FDA approval, the testing going to be normally get increased in that rate. If actually they come over and do the testing themselves on the product we provided, that actually have a big impact from our side. So to reduce the impact, I think the process is actually going to be a little bit increase on the testing side. It really depends on the impact when it comes to it.
When I read this and I see process testing, I think of business process testing, not the process of testing, like testing code. And when I think of business processes, I think of like flowchart kind of thing. And as far as somebody made a comment of, this is basically making things more simple. They said it better than that. I would agree with that. And what I see a lot of times people get caught up with is very impressive to have a complex business process and to have like a humongous chart to show how awesome the process is. And with this guidance of you should always be deleting part of the process. And that is actually with the way that I look at that is it's directly testing processes that are adjacent to that, the things you're removing. And then also testing for implications downstream.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying, one of the things I was thinking about when you talk about business processes is, it seems like we set up a process in what we think is important, right? And it might mean, just from trying to buy a piece of software, right, for your personal business, how many approvals does it need to go through? And what happens if you just got rid of like all the approvals? What would actually happen? What bad would actually happen?
Right. Yeah, that's a great example.
And maybe nothing. And maybe something goes wrong, and there you go. There's your 10%. You got to add it back in.
Right. And that's a good example. It's kind of something similar to what we're going through now is what stage gates are actually needed in this process we're working on. And what that means is like, when should the process basically be stopped until, all the check boxes are checked for that gate, as opposed to letting some parts of the process move forward. And what's the implication if that happens?
Okay, so we're about time now to move on to the next one. And thank you, everybody. This conversation is wonderful.
And then only the third step is simplify or optimize. The third step, not the first step. The reason the third step is because it's very common. It's possibly the most common error of a smart engineer is to optimize a thing that should not exist.
Okay, so that one was pretty short. Don't optimize something that should not exist.
Don't even implement it. I mean, that's maximizing the work not done. Guess he's very agile in his thinking after all.
I think I can relate to it in many examples, but the key one, as mentioned in the last slide, was also that people get so attached to even the processes or products that it gets really difficult to accept that, oh, we have to let it go. But I think it makes a lot of sense to have that mindset that a product or a process has a life cycle or part of it, and when required, it needs to go for sure.
You remind me of the IKEA effect. I don't know if you guys know it. That's one. It has a much more savant cognitive bias name, but that's basically the falling in love with the stuff that you did or you were involved in doing. That explains many of the drivers behind optimizing stuff to death. You know, when you work too much on your slides to make them awesome and beautiful because you think people are gonna just fall off the chairs when they see your beautiful slides. That's it. That has cost me overall in my life probably 150, 200 days of my life that I could have saved and done something better instead of optimizing.
When I read this one, the don't optimize something that should not exist, to me, it's we haven't discovered that you don't actually need this yet. So don't spend more time on it, basically. And with my teams, you know, I really push using best practices, and sometimes amazingly, if people at the code level, they just use some best practices. They don't have to optimize in the end anyways. But yeah, but in the end, when he's saying something should not exist, to me, that just means it may have been implemented or we plan to implement it, and we just haven't discovered that it's not actually needed yet.
If I remember correctly, he's referring specifically to the assembly process. So if like a step in the assembly process shouldn't exist, you shouldn't optimize it. So like maybe taking like parts from machine A and putting it on machine B, right? Maybe it's best off that a human does it because maybe you'll figure out that that step doesn't actually need to exist. And so before you optimize, you should spend time figuring out whether it needs to get optimized. But anyways, yeah, just context, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's basically what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
So I am thinking about how this might apply to a software product, maybe like a consumer app as an example, where you have maybe multiple different kinds of customers that use your app, and there's this one process that only a few customers use, but it doesn't work right, and they're complaining about it, right? And because you're hearing those complaints, it might surface up and say, hey, we need to solve this problem. We need to make sure that this app handles this part of the product. But in reality, right, that part of the product doesn't actually bring in any revenue, and it doesn't support the vast majority of your customers, right? That might be an example of you're simplifying and optimizing for something that really maybe doesn't even belong in your product to begin with.
We had a similar situation in a software product. We have a report that's due once a year to report to the government, and you could easily go into the system, pull the data you need, and put it in Excel. And it was discussed, well, we should make this automated. Well, once a year, a person spending 15 minutes doing this report was not something we should have exist. And then why would we optimize it in the system? I mean, why do something to even create that?
Well, that's when it's very useful to be able to do very, very quick back of the envelope calculations, consultant style, and where you build a case and you say, hey, after how many years is the effort that I'm going to spend on automating this? And by the way, we suck at estimating stuff, so multiply times 3 to 10 the effort that anybody estimates, especially me, multiply times 10 whenever I say something. And then see, hey, after how many years would that be worth it? Plus, if you want to really overcomplicate it and be a smartass, say, oh, what's the potential, the likelihood, the probability that we could use this automation for something else? That's like a bonus for being a smartass. But basically what I'm saying is, hey, if this will cost me 1.5 hours and it will save us after, let's say it cost me a full day, and after 4 years it would have been worth it, I'll do it. I'll do it. Why not? Unless it's a very dumping activity, I'll do it. Just for a change, do something else. But if it's something that's going to put 2 people on it for 2 weeks, yeah, I think the reflection you did, the validation step you talked about I totally agree. Again, all these things sound very, very nice and beautiful and simple and obvious, when Musk says them or when they're on a slide. But real life, I don't know if it's just me, but I seem to have a problem following even the most basic common sense stuff. That's the difference, the discrepancy between behavior and idealism. But that's a different topic.
If we have time, I'm happy to share one of Elon's stories, because Elon would say he has a hard time following his own process here too. So he can give you examples where he did. Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts about why he said this is step 3 and not just as a standalone? Why you have to do the other things first?
Well, at first it might seem like it's important. You might need it to begin with, but then it's good enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't know what you have, right, until you have it. Like, right, you have to have something to work with first before you can start understanding what can change.
Yeah, I think there's an element, as we're speaking, that I actually just thought of this, so apologies. This wasn't something I thought about ahead of time. But there's an element of, right, in Scrum you adapt. So it may be that what seems like a good requirement, and you seem like you've deleted the right parts of it, and you kind of go down the chain, and then as you start be moving into this step and simplifying and optimizing, right, you might learn that, oh, actually, what we thought was a good requirement maybe isn't, right? And you might have to go back in the process too. It's maybe not always forward.
Yeah, and something I was going to say about that is what came to mind for me is that you end up putting yourself in that position because you created something that you thought you needed, or you needed at the time. And then let's say software, right? I can think of something that we're working on right now where we implemented this piece of the product that was needed at the time to serve a particular function. And we have to continue to optimize it because like ripping it out would be the effort of like ripping it out and getting rid of it would be way bigger than optimizing it. So choices.
And Mario, you've got your hand up, and I think that's the last
but
bit of time we have.
I want to say I'm only going to speak if really nobody else wants to say something. Okay. All right. Oh, so the thanks to it. I don't know who spoke. I think it was Katie. She said in the moment you don't know if that thing is really you're going to need it or not. But in general, you could say in that moment, it's very tough for you to estimate or assess how valuable something is. It's very, very tough. How many things did I do in my life? I'm always taking my life because I'm really struggling with personal agility. Did I think I need to absolutely do this? And 2-3 years later, I thought that was the stupidest thing that I could think of in the moment. Things appear much, hindsight, basically. And so, the metaphor I think about, the analogy I think about always is you're in a labyrinth. And in a labyrinth, when you think you're going down the wrong path, the best and the only thing you should do, and really, is going backwards and finding the better path, right? But in our jobs, doing software, my observation is we're not allowed to make mistakes of going backwards and say, hey, this was not the right thing to do. This was not the right idea. Like in a football game, this was not the right tactic. No, you can't, because software engineers or product people are not allowed to make mistakes. They're going to get fired. So that's my parallel.
Yeah, there's a big assumption, I think, with a lot of what he's saying, right? That it kind of demands a high level of psychological safety to actually challenge any of these things and be able to do that without getting into trouble. Yeah. All right. Next step here.
And then finally, you get to step 4, which is accelerate cycle time. You're moving too slowly, go faster. But don't go faster until you have worked on the other 3 things first. Gotcha. Like if you're digging, your grave. Don't dig it faster. Stop digging your grave. Right.
Okay, so
And then
not sure what happened there. But yeah, another pretty short one there. So essentially, right, the idea is move faster only when you know what's worth going faster on. And something that comes to mind here, right, when we're thinking about Scrum, right, is Scrum is a cycle. So if that's something that might help thinking about what is a cycle, it may be, a sprint cycle or something like that. But yeah, again, this is hardware based, so might need to make a couple leaps if you're more of a software person. But all right, timer started.
I think that's actually the definition of Agile. It really is. If you nail those, for my teams, 2-week cycles, you're moving pretty doggone fast. One of the things that's just making me laugh is I have a Tesla, and right before Christmas Eve, to be exact, we got a software upgrade that changed the whole user interface. I couldn't even find out where my seat warmer was on Christmas Day, heading with homemade rolls, couldn't heat the car because I couldn't figure out where. I mean, everything changed overnight. And cycle time to me is also, don't put out a whole new user interface, do a part of it. Do a little piece so people don't get, okay, now where's the windshield wipers? Takes us 15 minutes to find it. Those are the accelerated cycle times I think that Agile really handles well.
That's funny. My parents had the same complaint. They were like, "Oh shit, where's everything?" But on the other hand, it's cool that the Tesla like you notice the acceleration curve changes. You have a lot of changes that are happening live to the vehicle, and so you're essentially going from an old model where you buy a physical good and then you're stuck with it to having a living product that's being upgraded, right? So think of having Windows XP rather than, or upgrades from Windows XP to Windows 8 to Windows 10, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that happens kind of automatically. But I guess the reason that I slowed down is it is kind of annoying to have that happen without your consent as a user. But on the other hand, there is a lot of value in having living hardware products. Quick additional example. So recently there was quote unquote a recall of Teslas, right? And in reality, all that they had to do was do an over-the-air update and fix whatever problem that the transit authority had via software. So
yeah, so they've really kind of, I kind of see that ethos that you're talking about, Danny, where it's this cycle time. They can do it so fast because it's already built into their system. To as soon as they see a problem, it's like, okay, let's send out an update over the air. They don't have to come in and bring their car in, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, somehow I'm Mike a bit struggling to connect to this one fully, because I think it's not just the time element. It has to be a value aspect as well, that what we're getting out from that time. So example, a Scrum team that's having 2 weeks of iteration in comparison to another Scrum team with 4 weeks of iteration. So it won't make sense to compare the two teams because they might be working on different engines. So, but I can see that it's pretty much, it's more of having lower batch sizes in terms of the delivery. Maybe that's what the reference is here.
Well, I think you hit it on, to me, when you said value and when Elon was saying losing value, digging a grave, it's the same thing, just looking at it in a different way. And to me, what this means is when you know you're going in the right direction, because you have these goals and your vision and blah, blah, blah. But inevitably, sometimes you do go in a wrong direction. And it's why having these quick cycles and getting things in the user's hands, you get a feel for when you're going in the wrong direction, which is sometimes more important.
Mhm.
But when you know you're going in the right direction, when you've done enough discovery that you're comfortable, you're going in the right direction, then you can move faster. And then you always have to slow it down a little bit when there's discovery that happens. And like out of the Scrum team, if that discovery is in the form of spikes, like if you're talking about story points, your team is still working on the effort is still there, the story points are still there. Maybe what they're delivering doesn't have the value because they're discovering at the moment.
Mhm. Yeah, okay, now it makes sense. Thanks.
So one of the first thoughts I had when I saw this is I started thinking about velocity, right? And how a lot of companies think about increasing your velocity, and that becomes one of these big measures that they look at is how much work is a team getting done, right? But that's kind of out of context around, well, okay, so the focus is already on accelerate, right? Pick up speed, start getting more stuff done. But they may not have had the conversation about, is it the right stuff? Are they doing the important stuff?
Yep.
We've been having those I've been bringing that up lately. And I really like Scrum and the Agile principles and all that good stuff. One thing I don't like about Scrum is we call a sprint a sprint. I tell my teams that they're actually jogs.
Yeah, I like that. You have 27 sprints in a year. That's going to be pretty tiring.
Yeah, it's supposed to be sustainable, right? You can't sprint all the time. You can jog all the time.
I like the XP word for it. They call it iteration. It's a little we're adjusting for the teams.
Mhm.
And actually, I like calling them sprints. And the reason I do is because I think of a marathon runner for New York Marathon, and they're getting ready and they're preparing. They've got all their practicing in. They've got a knowledge of what they're going to be doing for that next 2 weeks, but don't ask them for their autograph while they're running.
Mm.
I mean, this is the time you leave me
focus.
alone.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
let me go, and I do my thing.
And
That's
then,
such a
yeah, there should be, whoever said that earlier, they're like, you can't sprint all the time, but ideally you shouldn't be, right? Because Scrum has, to make it sustainable, Scrum has breaks baked in anyway. So they should be a little bit of sprinting and then kind of a break, and then another sprint and a break.
I'm just loving this concept. I'm thinking of the word focuses instead of sprints in my mind. I like to use Pomodoros. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Pomodoros, but it's the same kind of thing, like a little chunk of time where it's like, don't bother me. I'm not doing anything but what's in front of me.
I think a more adequate analogy for me would be cross-country running instead of a marathon, which goes way beyond the 50 kilometers, the 42.195 kilometers of a marathon. And that in cross-country, you got to adapt to the terrain. Could be raining, could be windy, could be slipping, could be a little bit more grass than you thought, could be more uphill than you estimated. You got to adapt during the race. So instead of just thinking about it on a flat asphalt, which is very bad for your running anyways, for your body, but anyways, instead of thinking about it as flat, one variable kind of sprint, stop, think about it as a much more complicated environment where you just adapt. When you can go sustainably faster and it's fast for the right things, you do it, as long as it's aligned with your race strategy, because you know what your pace is, you know what you can do. Imagine your body as a combination of a lot of different organs and pieces that work together, etc., just like a team. And then you do it. If you think, nah, this is not going to be good, I got to pace myself, I'm going to go hard after kilometer 30, 35, then you do it. And I think that's a more, it's just that this accelerated cycle time, I think the only thing that is missing here in terms of, just to be a bit anal about, vocabulary, is accelerated cycle time on the right value object or value pieces. I don't think that's easy to do in reality, because in our work, stuff is intangible. Nobody can tell you, oh yeah, look what we're working on today in the next 4 hours, that's high value stuff. let's focus on it. That's much tougher to do in reality than abstractly on paper when we're talking about these abstract concepts. But the idea is that, yes, when it's worth going faster on it because it will allow you to deliver the same value or a little less value or a little more value, but faster, because value delivered faster has much more economical value to the people who are going to use it. Oh yeah, it's over. Okay, I'm going to stop here.
Okay. No worries.
I'm gonna jump in. So, it seems to me that the conversation is taking cycle time to mean work harder, right? So working harder, working faster is one way to do the work, but there's also work smarter, right? We can increase our cycle times by improving our processes. We don't just have to put more sweat equity into it. So just to expand the horizon of how we might accelerate cycle time, because Musk in his process, he leaves out the how. He just says, this is the aim, right? And just like in Agile, it's for us to figure out, right, the how.
Good point.
All right. So thank you for everyone for hanging in there through 4 of these. We have one more.
And then the final step is automate. Now I personally made the mistake of going backwards on all 5 steps multiple times. So I have to repeat this. Yes, multiple times on Model 3, where literally I automated, accelerated, simplified, and then deleted. And then the final step.
Yeah, so he doesn't really go into much detail about automate, but he does really kind of highlight a little bit about, the process and the importance of following those steps. And Lenny, this might have something to do with what you were saying as well around increasing or accelerating cycle time. May have to do partly with how you're doing that, right? And how you do that may be just at least to some degree automating. But anyway, that's the last topic. That's the last step, is automate here.
I mean, the whole secret sauce, the whole magic powder is in the how. The what is, I don't know if I'm biased, but the what, I used to be in love with all the what and stuff. But after 20 years, the what is like the cheap stuff. It's the how where the secret sauce is.
Well, it makes sense if you've perfected something and made it faster and that you're convinced that you're doing the right thing, then the next thing to do is to hire it out. So it sounds like a natural next step.
So I feel like it might be valuable to share a story that Elon shared in this larger conversation about where he made this mistake. And he talks about a panel, like a carbon fiber panel that goes between the battery and the cab of a Model 3. So that's why you heard the Everyday Astronaut kind of mention the Model 3 there. He actually talked about a story there. And, they were really focused on trying to increase production of those cars. And they thought, okay, this part needs to get out the door if we're going to maintain production cadence. And so they built these big machines to make this part. And then they started working on kind of going backwards through the process, right? They started looking at how do they simplify and optimize their processes for building the part. Then they started looking at how do we make the part simpler. And it wasn't until the very end that they started going, wait a minute, why are we building this part, right? And they found that they had 2 different kinds of groups there. And one said, oh, we're building this part because it's better for fire protection. And then this other one said, no, we're building it because it's better for sound reduction. And they're like, wait a minute. So no one really knows why we're building this part. And they ran some tests where they said, well, let's build the car without the part at all and see what happens. And they found out that it was fine. It had no problems with sound. It didn't even get better with the part, and it didn't change their fire protection either. So what they actually discovered is they had a completely useless part that was slowing down their whole production, but they didn't find that out until the very end. So that was an example of Elon Musk specifically saying, hey, I made this mistake. I did the exact opposite direction on this.
I think that's what really made that interview resonate with me, because the number of times that I've spent automating something and sending something off to manufacture, and then realizing that I have like useless parts in there, that I like my bill of materials is like twice as high as it needs to be, or I had something that I'm not going to use at all. It's really frustrating.
So Hybe, is that how you say your name? I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. So I see this step and the previous one going hand in hand. Once we find that there's an opportunity to go faster and it's worth doing it, then automation would be the way to actually reduce the cycle time, or one of the ways to reduce the cycle time.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that myself. Like, is there really a big difference between improving the process with people and improving the process with machines? It seems like it might be more or less kind of the same intention there of just making it faster.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think it is a similar process, but I would still probably, I have something called road testing instructions, which means that we try it a few times with people before we make it, or write it into the documentation or the code or the machine instructions.
Yeah, because there is a difference in cost there, right? It's like it takes a lot of effort and time to build an automated system, and maybe not so much to have someone hand someone else a piece of paper or whatever it might be, right?
And they may discover for whatever reason that it really can't be automated as easily as we thought. So when things speed up, sometimes the process isn't quite as clear.
But the requirement is to automate.
Well,
But
that
then
sounds, that comes under the quit digging yourself a grave thing, doesn't it?
that's what I was kind of thinking. He also said that he has reversed some of those steps before. So I think part of it is also knowing this isn't working. We did something in our software and found out that it was going to be a huge hit on our performance. So we took it out, even though it looked great. We planned it. I mean, it was a not a lot of effort, but when we put it in and tried it out, no, we removed it immediately.
I think he puts a big emphasis on the order of the steps. So I'm not sure that he would necessarily say that you would go the other way, but I would say like there's never, I think he would kind of say, I'm trying to channel him a little bit here, but I think he would say, right, there's never a wrong time to go back, right, and start going through the process again of saying, wait a minute, let me go back to requirements on this one, or let me go back to a previous step and find out, like, did we make a mistake earlier on? Not saying that it's bad to go the reverse direction. I'm just saying I think that's what Elon was going for.
I don't know if I understood the word reverse here correctly. Does he mean by don't reverse the first steps, don't go backwards, or does he mean, I thought he meant do not annulate, cancel the work you did in the previous or in the 5 steps.
Maybe I did too. I thought it was, well, we found something wasn't working. I didn't do this in the correct order. I actually did it in the backwards order before we found the problem.
Yeah,
and the earlier work did not lead to the results we expected. Something like that.
What I mean is basically stacking up the benefits of each of the steps and making sure they don't, basically it's like non-regression testing. Somehow you make sure you don't destroy the benefits of what you have achieved with the previous steps. That's how I understood it. I don't know if it's correct. Tell me what you guys think.
I read it as, I didn't get it perfect either. Look at this thing that we wound up doing it totally backwards.
Yeah, and I did just put like a little graph here. I did not make this. This is modelthinkers.com that made this, but I thought it might highlight a little bit of this idea. When I was personally saying reverse, I was just saying, going from right to left in this scenario.
Hi, Jeremy Bellows here. So I have an interesting perspective on this. I'm a maintainer of Canopy, which is this Selenium-based library doing UI automation, and I'm also a software dev, done a lot of web dev. So when I get to that point of automation, a lot of times I find the urge to go back and do exactly the reverse of that, accelerate the code, make it simpler or optimizing. However, from a strategic planning perspective here, it's not about achieving the planning for success, rather going through those iterations and having them be somewhat a lot less painful, because if instead of going back and saying I could rewrite this code to be faster or I could simplify it, if I then start from step one and come up with requirements and say, okay, I just need to redo this. The objective is actually seeing the end result rather than getting stuck in my own perfection. I think that might help. What do you all think about that?
Jeremy, I can personally say that I empathize with that feeling, that desire to. I think there's a little bit of a perfectionist feeling there of whatever I'm working on, I want it to be really good and really high quality. And sometimes it's easy to forget, like, wait a minute, should I be doing this at all? I think I ran into that yesterday. I spent a lot of time on a project and I'm like, wait, if I knew it was going to take this long, why did I even start this? You know?
Exactly. And Elon tends to be a very forward person, very execution oriented. So I think that's what the wisdom he's talking from right here is, battling that perfection and instead just moving forward and gathering the data and learning from it at a strategic planning stage rather than the execution stage and getting stuck in that.
So that was the time that I had scheduled for talking about each of these process steps. And I really want to say thank you to everyone for having this conversation with me. This is a format I've never done personally. So I really appreciate the involvement of everyone and staying engaged and making this a really interesting experience. I personally was really excited to hear, what kinds of thoughts were going to come out and what kinds of things I've never considered. And there's so much here. So this is really wonderful for me too. I would like to take just a minute for, my own self-promotion here, and hopefully you don't mind, but just trying to talk about who I am. I am someone whose mission in life is to help people push the boundaries of what they believe in, or what they believe is possible, so that they can achieve bigger things than they dream possible. A big part of my life is really focused around business, and something that I'm trying to do with that personal why around businesses, that I help businesses create products that customers really want by focusing on customer understanding and employee empowerment, with the aim of making it good for businesses, good for people, and good for the planet. I work with executives, product owners, product managers, and teams in IT, marketing, and startups. And so I just want to say, if you are interested in working with me or you want to know more, here's my email to reach out to me. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I do have my website there, humanbusinessculture.com. It needs a revamp here soon, but I do have that there. That's it. That's my shameless plug there. But felt like I have to do this occasionally. I am a startup and trying to build this out myself. Again, thank you, everyone. And if you do want to stay on and talk some more, feel free to do that. But that is the time I had scheduled for today. So thank you.
Wow. All right. Did you want to do anything with the Jamboard? I found a way. I'm sorry, that was my bad. We can share it really easily. But
yeah, I was actually thinking I was going to try and pull it up and just see what was on there, and we can talk about whatever's on there now if we want to.
Let me see if this works. I'm going to put it in the chat. Let me see if this link works for everybody if you can get right in versus having
Nancy,
to act. Yeah.
Nancy, I need your wallpaper. It's amazing. It's the
My wallpaper?
Yeah, it's amazing. I don't know where you got that one, but
my Kanban board. So, oh, good.
Is this the same one, Nancy, that I have up right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can everybody get in, access that form without trouble?
Yes.
Good. Yay. I figured that out, Mike. Sorry about that. I was like, oh, I can't share it, but then good.
No
Oh, yeah.
worries. I don't see anything in there currently.
Let's see if we can put something in there.
I have access to it, but it's view only.
Oh, is it? Okay. Thank you for that.
Only for me too.
Is it? All right. Let me see. Can view. Ah, I see. Anyone with the link? Oh, yep. Here we go. Editor updating.
I don't know. I
Now-
clicked the link and it's working for me.
See if you now
You can edit it.
Yeah. So if you go to simplify or organize, Nancy, I don't know which slide that is. 3. I put a test sticky. Yeah. Let
I
me
see
edit.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what's different about me clicking the link versus other people. I'm certainly not special.
I just now changed it. So
No,
hopefully-
everybody knows you hacked Nancy's computer, Katie. You just uncovered yourself. You shouldn't have told her.
Yeah. Since you changed it, I can edit it.
Yay.
So I'd had one thought that we didn't talk about. We spent a good amount of time on the very first step there, talking about making requirements less dumb. And something that I think about a lot is Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. Anyone's read that book? He talks so much about, as part of their validation process in every sprint with every user story that they do, is that they actually have to test with customers and find out that the work they did actually provide value to the customer. And if they can't prove that it actually provided value, they get rid of it, right? They actually remove that code. Something that seemed just so interesting, and I've never actually experienced that directly. I don't really see very many places go, oh, well, we tried this at the end of the sprint and they didn't like it. Bye, gone, right?
Yeah, I think that's smart. Although that also assumes that you've got like a relatively optimized like sprint schedule. And if your teams, they don't deliver everything that's needed to create a full chunk of value in one sprint, then it seems a little disastrous to just delete that.
I think to me, the weakest link there is probably the ability to actually validate whether it's valuable. I think that's where the teams struggle. It's like,
yeah, I'm in product, and that's the biggest problem, especially in the B2B space. Customers don't have time to check it, unless you're intimately involved with them. They're not going to look. They're not going to tell you. They might. And then Google Analytics only tells you so much.
Hey, Mike, so I have a question about the origination of the 5 processes. Are these Elon's that he came up with and then dictated downwards into his organization that says you shall, or did these evolve organically from his inside his organizations and he coalesced them?
good question. I have no idea.
Because it makes a difference, right? If you're in an organization and this requires top down, then you have to sell your leadership on saying, hey, this is the new way we're going to work. And if it's organic from the inside out, then you have to work at the team level to get them to buy in to the process. And those are two distinctly different approaches to doing this type of work.
Yeah, and like I said, well, unfortunately, he just doesn't tell us, right? It's not part of the conversation of, how did this come about? He talks about borrowing experience from Silicon Valley and Agile experiences elsewhere, but I don't know. I don't know if he came in and said, okay, SpaceX, these are our principles, this is what we're doing, or if it was created over time. I did mention some insiders that I know that work there, but they didn't start there. So I actually don't know if it was something that grew early on I say early on, actually SpaceX has been around for a while, but I don't know if it was something that was part of their ethos from the beginning or something that they formed, unfortunately.
There's somebody we can try to get over here and ask. It's Joe Justice, and he's a really cool guy. I'm sure at some point you, Mike, or somebody can get him, or maybe Nancy can get him to do an interview with us. Like, I'm sure he knows. That guy is extremely smart. Plus, he's been there. I'm sure he doesn't know everything inside Elon Musk's head, but I'm sure he can help. And yeah, that's what leaves me really hungry, is how he does that stuff. I mean, on a daily basis. I would do I don't know what just to work with him for a month. Just that.
Yeah, I would love to meet this person. I don't know exactly who that is, but I mean, if you can help me connect, I would love to talk to him.
Oh, he's very, very keen to connect with people on LinkedIn. I wrote you his name in the chat. He's super famous. He's the hardware guy, the Agile hardware guy. He worked at Tesla with Elon Musk for a lot of time.
Fantastic.
Really interesting. I'm taking a look at them. Thanks. I just had it. I feel right now like two links are kind of making a full circle. My professor in one of my classes was just talking about Wikispeed, and this is the guy who did that. So it's kind of interesting.
Very cool.
I just want to share something that I didn't share it before, because first I talked too much already, and the other one is it's very, very abstract. But one of the concepts that when I was a software engineering student, a computer science student, that stuck with me since then is a paper from the 80s called No Silver Bullet. It's a seminal paper, and it relates to a lot of work on wishful thinking and stuff like that in software engineering. It's really, really concrete. It's not like it sounds, but there is related concepts relating to the study of complexity in doing any software. Back in the time, they didn't use the word product, but what they mean there is really any complex system or product. And there is two concepts around complexity that we studied really deeply. One is essential complexity, and essential complexity is the inherent complexity to solving a problem. So you assume your system or your product is the material solution, material in the sense of code, software, to a problem, to solution to a problem. And that solution itself has her essential complexity, something that has nothing to do with the way you implemented the solution, nor the way the solution is delivered. It's the complexity inherent to the solution. Then you have the complexity inherent to the problem that has nothing to do with that. That means you have 100 people over the course of 100 years. Each one of them is going to keep improving and finding an even better solution by decreasing the complexity. And I feel like this guy, Elon Musk, keeps getting to the smallest possible essential complexity that is possible by his iterative process, on top of being smart. That's what my feeling was the whole time listening to him talk, and that's what I'm still very hungry. I want to know how he does it.
That sounds like another presentation you could do, Mike.
I'm slightly distracted because I'm trying to connect with Joe Justice right now.
Oh man, Mike, if you type his name on the web and on YouTube, you're gonna have enough to study for, I don't know, a year. So but just connect with him. I'm sure my friend does a lot of interviews with him. She did 12 episodes just with him. She dived really deep in the stuff that he did. I can send you her website and podcast link.
Wonderful.
Yeah, please do. Wow, I just noticed he's mutual friends with my co-founder, my startup.
Yeah. Well, the connection on LinkedIn is sent, so there we go. I'm excited.
Tell him hello from me. Hello from Germany. Tell him.
Will do. Yes.
And this Jamboard it will stay open. It's open, so you can continue to put your thoughts down on there for Mike.
And what was your name? It was Pushkar, right? That you just talked. You're the one that brought up Joe Justice, right? Or sorry, or no? Who brought it? Who just talked?
I shall remain unknown. But I put the link to my friend's podcast episodes with him, with Joe Justice.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
know-
Yep.
So there's I think now there is, okay, the episode series is called Agile at Tesla. And they really go around every single topic, including finance and product development in detail. There is about 19 episodes now. Let me think. There is, 9. Sorry, and that would be very interesting because she's very, how can I say, she's a no BS, straight to the point kind of person, and she's in California. What I wanted to say about the 5 principles is, I don't know how you guys feel. I'd like to ask a question in the room. I don't know if we're still recording, but the whenever you read, I don't know, I'm sure we're all pretty much well read, right? I don't know, we probably each read several hundreds of books, but there is a threshold beyond which acquiring knowledge, understanding, listening to the secrets and the awesome techniques that other people found out, I feel doesn't help me at all becoming better at my craft. Because I didn't come up with it. There is a big difference between coming up with stuff, solving something yourself, doing it yourself, and listening to it from somebody else.
Yeah, it's so funny because as soon as I saw the 5-step process, I thought, oh, this reminds me of the Spotify model. And, the Spotify model was like this big thing, and a bunch of people took it and tried to use it at all these other companies, and it didn't work for them, right? Because they didn't really understand it. They didn't understand how to implement it. And the irony is that by the time other people were trying to use the Spotify model, Spotify didn't even use the Spotify model anymore. So yeah, it's a really important point. And I kind of was thinking about that too, was, are we just going to see kind of another framework or another model taken from something that someone said and said, okay, now we're all going to do this and just hope that it works for the best, without people really understanding and diving in and understanding.
Yeah, it's really good. And when I first learned Agile, it's like, oh, this is great. And then I said, before I can really roll this out, I need to test it out. So I started trying to use as many of the Agile principles as I could in my just everyday life, right? Taking the 12 principles and then applying it to what I do at home and projects I do at home. And once I was able to wring it out with what I do, then I could really understand how to use it at work.
Yeah, I love that. I think it was Lenny. I think Lenny challenged me on this. He was asking me like, how am I applying Agile at home? How am I doing it for myself, right? And it's like, how can I call myself an Agilist if I'm not using it at home?
So this resonates so much with me, Stuart. So I'm going to go on record. I know this is being recorded. So I'm going to tell you the true story of my life. Remember when I was speaking earlier about to the points by Elon, I kept referring to how I felt doing that stuff in my life. It's because since 2015, I thought I could get started because I knew Agile so well. I could get started with personal Agile and get optimally to design my life optimally in 3 months. I'm still struggling. I'm still challenging myself. I'm still learning. I have, I think, 12 flip charts on my walls with different techniques and stuff that I've been trying for the past 6.5 years. And it started with the book Personal Kanban by Jim Benson, and it got me down into a rabbit hole. And my biggest challenge in my life, including professional, was personal Agile in my life. It is the biggest challenge that I've ever faced. It's so tough, and that's why doing this stuff really for real for me is I don't know how long I'm gonna stay at it, keep trying to do it, but it's managing to do and understand and implement Agile in my personal life. Not because I want to prove something to anybody. I really believe in it, but it's so tough. And that's how it changed my career, my work life, because I started thinking, this stuff we're doing here with the team is so much more trivial because we have real stuff. Do it in your life is the next challenge. And so just to conclude, you said, we talked about, how much tougher it is to get to the real essence of what these guys talk about. You spoke about the Spotify model. Very often I feel like understanding these things is like reading a public interface. You have no idea how these guys implemented it. You know that there's gonna be some genius guy in some GitHub code, open code base, nobody knows where it is, who did the perfect implementation of that stuff, and it beats the performance and the complexity of your implementation by 100 times factor, but you're never gonna know it because you don't know where to look. And I gotta live with that. So
thank you.
I think you should also look at it like we're putting this in people's lives all the time. This is what they're living as their work.
And Mario,
thank you, Mike. This was really a good subject.
Oh, thank you. I really do appreciate it. This is the second meetup I've done, so it's always I still feel very new at it, so it's always a little intimidating. So thank you.
You did great. You did great. And I'm glad you agreed to speak. It was great. Any closing thoughts, final words for Mike?
I just hope we can do this again with a mural board and get people to think about that stuff in a silent brainstorm before we start exchanging and writing down stickies and that stuff. Because, you know, the stuff we work on is not making pizzas. You know, we can learn that stuff using the pizza game to learn Kanban, but the stuff we do is not repetitive. It's reinventing solutions to problems every single time, several times a day. So doing it again on a mural board and see what people come up with, I think it would be awesome. I gotta invite you to our group.
Cool.
For Nancy, I messaged her like an hour before this, and I'm like, I think I need a mural board. Have one.
Yep. Jamboard works pretty good, and it's free, and most people can get to it. So, yeah, great job. I appreciate your time, Mike, and great to see you. And that was really cool, and I could see a lot of topics coming out of this one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.